Well, the Holdovers is a slightly, that still has some hard parts, but a little bit more lighthearted than the
Yeah,
second one.
yeah,
But
yeah.
that's great.
Well, and it's also got a kind of a moving relationship because this professor
Mm-hmm.
uh, or teacher is an older man, uh, does not have a family
Mm.
himself, and the young boy, uh, his mother, or you may recall,
Mm-hmm.
has remarried, and so the professor is having problems
Yeah.
with him until he kind of takes over being a surrogate parent for him
Yeah.
and drives him to Boston. Yeah, I think it is.
Yep. I believe it was.
Where in order to meet his actual birth father in a psychiatric hospital, and his father is so far gone that he doesn't even recognize his son and so forth. But that is his birth father.
Yes.
And then when his mother finds out that this teacher had done that, had driven him to see him, she goes to the head of the school and insists that they fire him, which they do.
Mm-hmm.
And the teacher had meanwhile also told the boy about the difficult relationship he'd had in his family with others.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, and I remember it was very, the bond between the student and the teacher.
Yeah.
You can tell it makes a very changing impact on him, which no doubt you've had on so many of your students.
Well, and that I've had when I was younger.
Yeah, in return.
My surrogate fathers and surrogate siblings.
Who would you consider your surrogate fathers while your dad was away?
I've got their photos.
Yep.
You may have noticed it on a wall as you come in from the carport.
Oh, yes, I have seen those.
In fact, it's two walls opposing each other, and I have a lot there. But the very most important, meaningful spiritual mentor I ever had, we're going to, today's Monday, just last night when we discussed that book.
Yep.
Online with the study group that Miriam and I belonged to for a half century.
Yeah, wow.
And they were mostly faculty at BYU and a lot of them history professors.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I had the chance to suggest the book we read and discuss next month.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a short biography by a philosophy professor at BYU of that man.
Oh, really?
And then he was the director of the LDS Institute of Religion when I and Miriam were both undergrads, and we attended his classes.
Really?
Yeah, and beyond that, he had founded at the time a co-educational fraternity, which we both joined.
Yes.
You may know about
it's
that.
The Lambda
Delta
Sigma for LDS, right? Yep.
Yeah. And so this biographer does a really great job of dealing with what the things that Lowell Bennion had written, the books, and the books and thinkers that had influenced him. He went to Germany and earned his doctorate there.
Wow.
And it was dealt with his writing about a sociologist there that so impressed him, whose name was Max Weber.
Mm.
And I had always understood that Max Weber became more famous because of what Lowell had written about him.
Oh.
There, you know. In any event, so he was a great influence on Lowell, and this biographer mentions one other, and that was Albert Schweitzer, another German. Did you remember anything about him?
Doesn't ring a bell right away.
Well, he was a Lutheran theologian.
Mm.
He was also an organist and a doctor. He was all of that.
Uh-huh.
And he served a mission, as it were. No, but he actually moved to Africa.
Oh.
And was serving an African congregation there.
Uh-huh.
Schweitzer. It just so happens that after we got married and we were living in an apartment not far from Temple Square where we were married,
Mm-hmm.
and Miriam was still, the end of the school year hadn't occurred yet.
Mm-hmm.
She was still teaching junior high.
Mm-hmm.
And was our only source of income.
Wow.
We could not have afford to go on a honeymoon.
Wow.
And so we were living in this apartment just blocks away from Temple Square on 2nd Avenue. And one day, about 3 days after we were in our apartment, we were running out of food.
Oh, wow.
So on a weekday, and I was just recovering from kind of an illness that I came back from my mission with before we got married. I did get a few part-time jobs that I had briefly that summer, because we were there for a full summer.
Mm-hmm.
But 3 days after we had moved there, I went down to South Temple and to a Safeway store I'd never been in.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a midday on a weekday. There seemed to be no one else in the store.
Mm.
And so I was going from aisle to aisle to find the things we needed, when a man came around the corner and with gray hair, a mane like a lion,
Mm-hmm.
and walked right up to me and he said, "Can you tell me where the Campbell soup is?" And I told him that I was there for the first time and I didn't know where the soup was. So he thanked me and he walked on. But I said to him, "I'm sorry, President McKay.
Oh, really?
I can't help you." And I didn't know then. I learned it later from cousins that my grandfather Rogers, during the Depression era, so in the 1920, late 1920s, 1930s, had been an instructor at what the church then had in urban centers, which were called academies, rather than before we had seminaries or institutes.
Sure.
And to serve the same purpose. And he was the colleague and supervisor of another young instructor, because both were from Weber County, you know. And that man was David O. McKay.
Oh, wow.
Now I'm getting a little astray of what I was saying about Bennion.
Yeah.
Right, but if I had known when President McKay, my only conversation with him,
Yep.
I had that relationship with my grandfather, I would have stopped, because I never met either of my grandfathers.
Oh, wow.
No. My maternal grandfather had died 2 years before I was born. And so my grandfather, a few years after he was at that academy, he abandoned his family of 5 daughters and 2 sons.
Oh, wow.
And went back east and never returned.
Do you think that played in a...
He did that because he was so abusive to his wife and daughters.
Oh, yeah.
That my father ran away from home. And in fact, at age 12, didn't return to Utah till 2 decades later. Who knows what happened at age 12? You know the people took advantage and abused him.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say when you said that your grandpa ran away. I didn't realize that, but that must have played an effect on your dad's whole life.
But, I'm sure it did. But, and there's more I could say about my father. But I would have asked I told President McKay if I'd known, and I would have asked him to tell me what he knew about my grandfather.
Yeah.
But that didn't happen. So anyway, now back to Lowell Bennion. He also founded a co-educational, I told you that, fraternity, which Miriam and I both joined, were very active in. She became we had 5 women's chapters, 2 men's chapters, 4 men's chapters, I think, 4 men's chapters, 5 women's, and a total of about 500 members.
Wow.
So in my senior year, she was the president of one of the women's chapters.
Oh, fun.
And I had been the president of one of the men's chapters and was then elected to be the inter-chapter president. And that's how I got to know her.
Okay,
and
great.
We did have a lot in common, especially theater.
Yes.
And so we went to a number of plays together.
Fun.
But if I hadn't made that acquaintance, when I had my faith crisis on my German mission, which I didn't intend to go on until after I graduated, I would not have had the prompting, which I call a personal revelation. And yet, when you read the family newsletter coming up, I think that will tell you something about that too.
Yeah, I'll watch for it.
The role that promptings from outside of my own thinking influenced my life in very important ways, and my choices. And that was that faith crisis was one of the greatest blessings of my life after it got resolved, because then you may know, proposed to Miriam 2 years before I returned home.
Yeah.
And then we got married 9 days later.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting?
It is.
It was the opposite of a Dear John.
Yes, it was. And she waited, and if I recall, you sent your pin from the LDS.
You remember that? Okay, yes.
Which makes that even more meaningful, knowing that both you and Grandma were in that and highly involved in that.
Lowell Bennion was so influential, and where did I put that biography? Because I think I put it somewhere in my office.
Sure.
And I already read it, and Those most of the people in our study group did not attend the U, and at a different time. I think that most of them are younger than I.
Sure.
And so they never knew him, but they knew about him. And as a matter of fact, in the biography, we're told that he was invited by President McKay to address the members of the church in two separate general conferences, and as far as I know, he was the only non-general authority who ever did speak in a conference.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty high accolades.
Yeah. And at the time I went on my mission, Bennion, one of Bennion's books called An Introduction to the Gospel, was so welcomed in the church that it was a manual for gospel doctrine, a manual for investigators.
Wow.
And when I got on my mission, they had even printed a translation of it in German.
Oh, wow.
Which I then used to teach a young teenage boy and his brother, and it really interested them too. And later, that young boy, I never knew about it for decades till we went to Vienna with our family. That he had gone to southern Germany, and then when he was older, he had joined the church there. The only person that I ever had and taught that had, because there was a reason why I didn't have contact with investigators except in my first 6 months, because I then was an assistant to the president.
Yes.
And I overlooked the work of the missionaries and visited them, but didn't stay in any community.
Yep.
In any event, so what was I going to say about that beyond what we just did? That book was so interesting and liked by so many people in the church at the time. In German, it's Eine Einführung ins Evangelium, an introduction to the gospel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Very nice.
So.
Well, that's great. I love that.
And then just one other thing about Bennion, which I read about I told you about Albert Schweitzer, which I learned about in that biography. Well, we were married, and I had no prospect to go to graduate school. I didn't feel like we could ever afford it. I didn't know what I would be doing. But then I learned about the Danforth Foundation's fellowship for those who are training to be teachers. And the Danforth Foundation was formed by the owner of the company in Missouri that produced Ralston cereals.
Oh.
And then also a dog food.
Oh, wow.
And anyway, I learned that they had a fellowship, and it was for people who wanted to train to be college teachers and had a religious background. So I applied, and the man in charge of the foundation came from Missouri, and he did this as part. That was his job, to interview applicants.
Mm-hmm.
And he came to Salt Lake, and I was invited to have an interview with him in the lobby of the Hotel Utah, which is now the Joseph Smith building.
Oh, okay.
And we sat across from each other, and he of course was not LDS.
Mm-hmm.
I think he probably was Baptist.
Yeah.
And at one point he asked me if I had read any theology, and I knew by that he meant besides LDS.
Yep. Uh-huh.
And this is another coincidence, but it so happened that shortly before I came home, I went into a German bookstore, and I saw a rather small book which had in it a lecture that Albert Schweitzer had given.
Oh, really?
Titled Christianity and the World Religions. Christentum und die Weltreligionen. And for some reason, that was the only book like that I ever bought there.
Uh-huh.
Took it with me and read it on the boat that we took back then. It was before airplanes were taking people back and forth. It took about 4 days to get from there back to the States.
Wow.
And I read it then, and so I could tell this man interviewing me, I said, well, about that book.
Yeah.
You know, that it wasn't, that I wasn't totally restricted to LDS sources.
Yep.
And I got the Danforth.
Wow.
Which was very generous. It allowed us to repeat it for 4 years. It paid for tuition and our living expenses.
Oh my goodness.
And if we ever had any dependents along the way, that would cover their expenses.
Wow.
That's why we had 2 daughters while I was at Yale.
Yes.
And then it ran for 4 years, and I had just finished my master's degree at Yale after going to the School of Drama for 2 years.
Yep.
And I really was tired of being a student.
Yep.
So that's why I went to Howard University in DC to teach there, and which I did for 4 more years.
Yes.
During which I went to DC purposely to look for government work with my Russian.
Yes.
And I learned that most of the jobs using Russian there were already held by native speakers.
Oh.
So I then finally decided after the first year at Howard that I did want to have a career teaching Russian.
Wow.
And then was able, it was another fortunate thing, after my classes in the daytime, to commute across DC to Georgetown University, which was Catholic.
Yep.
Where they had, like other universities in the DC area, night programs on the graduate level, because so many of the people wanting to take those classes had government jobs during the day.
Oh yeah.
So I was able to, for actually 4 more years, earn my doctorate there.
Wow. So basically, so you went, is this right? You went University of Utah, Yale, then you taught at Howard while simultaneously getting your doctorate at Georgetown.
Exactly.
Wow.
And then we were interested. Krista was born in D.C.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were interested in coming back to Utah, and that's why I sent an application to the U again, our alma mater, to see if they had an opening for Russian. And they did. And that's why then I went there and taught for 3 years.
Yep.
And I was content to be back there and would have stayed till I got a red carpet rolled out from the institution in the South.
Yes.
And they wined and dined us, if you will. And I had no idea why. They were so eager, and there was more cordiality there than there had been on the U faculty. And so again, a prompting, and we were torn. We bought a home next to the university, which we then had to sell after we went to Provo. But we did that, and that really opened the door that I could not foresee for a lot of things that would not have occurred if I stayed at the U. And one was to become involved in theater again.
Oh, yeah.
I'd forgotten that I'd even written a play.
Wow.
Till then. And I don't know if you know that story, but that play was Hubener.
Oh.
Yeah.
So you wrote Hubener before you even got back to Provo. Is that correct?
No, while I was there.
Oh, while you went to back, that's when you wrote Hubener.
I had a colleague, he was younger than I, a professor of German, and he gave a lecture one afternoon at the Y to the faculty of our College of Humanities, which I attended, in which he was telling us about his research, and which was he was about to write a book about it, about 2 post-World War II Nobel Prize-winning German novelists. And their names were Günter Grass and Heinrich Böll. And in both of their novels, they mentioned Hubener. And that's what my colleague was going to be writing about. And with high praise of him. And so while I was there in that audience, he pointed at me, and he said, "Tom, you should write a play about it." And I'd forgotten I'd even written a play.
Wow. 15
years earlier, is all. And so a light bulb went on, another prompting.
Yeah.
And I stayed up the next 2 nights with his research, and I wrote the first draft of that play.
In 48 hours?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I did.
That's amazing.
Anyway, so that's how that turned out. That's an opportunity I wouldn't have had at the U.
Yes.
As well as other things like church callings.
Yeah.
And including after the fall of the Iron Curtain, a call to be a mission president in Russia because they needed a mission president who spoke Russian.
Yeah, which was perfect.
And then other things that came from that, like the patriarchal thing.
Yeah.
So isn't that amazing?
Well, yeah, when you look at it chronologically, you can very clearly see the things that made the impacts and led you to the next thing, and all the doors lined up. It's amazing.
And I credit the promptings I had and the choices we made. In both cases. And the one only in my senior year at the U, I didn't intend to go on a mission. Till I had other promptings that came unexpectedly that caused me to decide I needed to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, both you and Grandma have showed a lot of faith between all those promptings, not only to receive them, but then to follow them. whenever you
Yes,
felt that you were impressed.
I just think that was a great thing. Well, in this next newsletter, I think I talk about that.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so.
Well, that's amazing.
And I've gone on and on about that with you.
No, it's great. I've loved it.